You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome back to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany 90.9 FM. My name is Eric Hardiman, and I'm the co-host here with Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hey, Eric. I'm excited to be here today as we have an alum with us, so it should be a great show.
We do. An alum of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, the MSW class, Masters of Social Work, 2006. We're very excited to have with us the author of On Conquering Schizophrenia, From the Desk of a Therapist and Survivor. We have the author of that book, and his name is Robert Francis. That's a pen name that he uses, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He's an alumni of the School of Social Welfare and has written this wonderful book that we're going to talk about. So we're very excited to have him here. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Hardiman. Hi, Alyssa. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming today.
My pleasure.
Let's just jump right into this, about the inspiration for the book, why you chose to write. Is this something that you've always wanted to do? Let's start with that.
Actually not, Alyssa. It was kind of ironic because of my personal diagnostic of having paranoid schizophrenia, which was diagnosed, like most people, in my early 20s. Since that time, I've been working pretty much, although I was diagnosed in my 20s. But I had never had any inkling to write a book about schizophrenia. I had no inspiration to write one. I never even thought about it.
Sure.
And for many, many years, I never even approached it, the topic. Now, in 2017, I happened to be unemployed, primarily secondary to psychosis, which is an interesting topic altogether because sometimes, because of my symptoms and such, I do what I call job hop.
Okay. Where
I'll be in a job for a couple of years. I'll be doing well. I work as a talk therapist. Postmasters, have an LCSW, and I'll be on a job for a couple of years, and then things will start to unravel a little bit for me. And then proactively, I job hop, which
Sure.
is my term, and I'll go into a new environment, and I feel relieved, and it seems to work out. And there's no crime in job hopping. if you need to do it, you do it. But I was in between jobs in 2017, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And in fact, I had just been hospitalized at Samaritan Hospital in 2017 for a very short time. And by the way, inpatient hospitalization's got to be the most untherapeutic place in the world, in a general manner, as you're trying to recuperate. It's like kind of like a war zone. It really needs to be more serene. But I just got out of the hospital after about 4 or 5 days in 2017, and I was unemployed, and I was just kind of went home and I was recuperating, trying to get my mind back together, as I often do, because the psychosis comes and goes. Sometimes it's worse. It's present every day, but sometimes it's worse than others. So in 2017, I was out of work. I was going back and forth to the library to stay busy. I was reading or something to keep myself occupied. And one day at the library, I just said, I think I'm going to start writing. And I picked up a pen, just started writing.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was going to write about. And if you look at the very beginning of the book, it says, why write? And that was my premise. Why write? Who am I writing for? Am I writing for me? Am I writing for an audience? Why write to begin with? And that was my first thought. And then from there, 2 years later, came On Conquering Schizophrenia. And it took me 2 full years to complete. 2 very rewarding, arduous. There was a lot of persistence to it.
Sure.
Every day writing, editing. I did it. It's self-published through iUniverse. I did everything from cover to cover and in between.
Okay.
And just when I thought I was done, they would say, well, what about writing something, about the author segment? Or what about the back cover? Or, what about a preface? Or, all these different things.
Yeah.
And so it prolonged. But that was the inspiration. I was out of work. I had nothing to do. I started writing.
So congratulations, first of all, on completing the book. I mean, that's quite an achievement. Most people have not written books in our society, and it's an impressive achievement in and of itself. But I wonder if we could go back a little bit, and with your permission, and certainly, choose what you feel like
Sure.
sharing and talking about. But can you talk a little bit about what it was like initially to be diagnosed? You said you were in your 20s.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen, and sort of what was that experience like for you?
Well, I had just graduated in 1993, and then afterwards I started, the first thing that started happening, I came down with a good case of insomnia. Couldn't sleep. Little by little, I deteriorated. In the schizophrenia conceptualization, now they call it first onset psychosis. It wasn't always the case back then. They didn't call it that. That's a modern paradigm. And they're doing terrific work at that stage. And it's like any other illness now. Like if cancer is caught early, the prognostic improves. So that's
Right.
the same thing now with early onset. They're creating a lot of resources for that particular niche. And it's going well, and the outcomes are getting better and better with schizophrenia. So I was diagnosed. It hit me like a blindsided, because I had no insight at all. There was no mental illness in the family. Nobody knew about schizophrenia in the family. My family picked up that I was acting erratic and saying strange things and not behaving like myself, and they, after a certain amount of time, my behavior became so erratic that there was a, what do they call those, intervention, a family intervention. My uncle, my aunt, and my mom came to my apartment, and they said, you got to go to the hospital. I'm like, why? Well, something's not right. So anyway, so they scooped me up. I trusted them a little bit more of my paranoia. I remember the trip to the hospital, floridly psychotic, floridly delusional, floridly paranoid, on the way to the hospital. And I went there, and that's where it all started. I was admitted to Samaritan Hospital for probably a week. They started me on a Haldol injectable. Mm-hmm. And the very first night I was in the hospital, I had an intense and severe allergy reaction to the initial dosage of Haldol. So I'm on the unit, and then all of a sudden all my muscles start to tighten from my head to my toe, and I couldn't walk. It was paralysis, kind of like a catatonia, but
Right.
all my muscles were tightened, and I walked down the hall as best I could. I was in a crouch because I couldn't stand up. Oh, you're just having a reaction to the Haldol. Here's some Benadryl. And so that was my initiation to medications.
Yeah.
That's how things got started, and that's how the learning curve got started. But initially, Dr. Hardiman, I was blindsided and knew very little, and I continue to learn to this day, 25 years later.
Yeah.
So do you hope, as you're talking about this experience, you were unfamiliar, you didn't know what to expect. In your book, is it sort of a resource? Can it be a resource for individuals who maybe are just diagnosed, or family members who are sort of needing that support, or to know what's next, where they don't know, they've never been through this before? What does your book offer to a person reading it?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of an original type of book, I think. It's not just a memoir.
Mm-hmm.
I write why I didn't want to write a memoir, because I kind of felt, I don't know, I just didn't want to do a memoir. And so I go about different topics, but it is for both sides of the treatment paradigm. It's for the providers to understand the experience, and also for the person experiencing it to get a better understanding of the clinical side. So it offers information from both sides of the paradigm, both to providers and to the afflicted. I'll give you a quick example. When I finished the book, my dearest mother, who I adore and who's been supportive for 25 years, after she read the book, she's known me and been through the whole thing. She said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea what you were going through. I just saw the exterior. I didn't know what all the psychology." And she's like, "Oh my goodness, I did not know that you were going through those things." So even towards somebody who's known me closely all these years, she had no understanding of the underlying psychology.
Yeah.
And the good thing about this book is, interestingly, there's not a lot of books like this describing the experience. So there's not a lot of experiential stories out there about the affliction. The most eminent book in the annals is by Dr. Ellen Sachs, and she wrote The Center Cannot Hold. It's her memoir. It's a great book. I recommend it. And she won, Dr. Sachs is probably the most prominent individual in the world right now on schizophrenia. She researches it. She was graduated from Yale Law School, and she's a teacher out and a professor at USC, a doctor of philosophy. She wrote a book, and in 2007 she won what they call the MacArthur Foundation Award, which is also known as the Grant of Genius. So she wrote that memoir, and besides my book, there's not a lot of singular personal testimonies about the experience. So I think that narrative is missing in the genre, and it informs both sides of the paradigm, I think.
Well, it's interesting. There are other books, as you said, that are memoirs, and there are books where people have talked about, going back to the early part of the 20th century, have talked about their experiences with mental health challenges, but maybe not in quite the same way that yours does. And certainly the way, one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things that seems really unique about your work here in this book is speaking to both someone who might be going through it and to providers. And certainly as a person who's experienced this yourself, but also as a person who is a professional helper. You help others going through challenges that they're going through. You have a dual perspective that's really unique.
I think that's a contribution to the book as well. As I do work as an LCSW and I'm a talk therapist, I never disclose in the professional environment, not because of shame, just because I find it not pertinent or relevant. Just why, it's just a health issue and I keep it private. By that accord, as far as using a pen name, I'm kind of reticent to put my actual name out for public consumption. So that's why I use a pen name. And I think down the line, maybe if I retired or something, I might not use a pen name anymore. But just for my own privacy, and I don't think it's so much stigma, Alyssa. It's more just, I don't find it pertinent. It's a medical problem. If somebody had diabetes, they don't, shout it from the rooftops when they go to work. So it's a private medical issue, and I leave it at that.
Yeah. That said, you have an experience that informs who you are as a helper, I would imagine. And I don't want to speak for you, but if you're helping an individual who's going through some mental health challenges, are there some intrinsic experiences that you draw on in your ability to be a helper?
Oh, absolutely. Because I know what paranoia is, I know what auditory hallucinations are, I know what delusions are. I have a great client, and he has schizophrenia, and I remember him telling me in one session, he's like, well, if you had schizophrenia, you would understand what I was talking about. And I said, you're right. I that's a valid point, So I deflected, but I certainly can understand the experience, and I think it does bring a level of acumen that is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's just the use of self.
Sure.
And just because I have the experience doesn't say that it's anything superlative. It's just my use of self. Although I don't disclose about my experiences in the professional realm because I'm not the patient in that context. So that's been my perspective on that. But it's just a use of self.
Yeah.
And every therapist has their bag to pull from. So I don't see anything exceptional about it or anything, but yes, on some level, perhaps a little more empathy or perhaps a little bit more understanding.
So if you just tuned in, you're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB 90, Albany FM, and we are talking with Robert Francis, who's the author of On Conquering Schizophrenia from the Desk of a Therapist and Survivor. So two words that really strike me there in that title, and I want to ask you about, and I think these two words fit nicely with the current paradigm in mental health treatment, which is really about recovery. But the two words that strike me here are conquering and survivor. And so you taught, right there in the title of the book, Conquering Schizophrenia. This is not something that you have succumbed to, but this is something that you've conquered. And then also, I'd like to hear you talk about what it means to be a survivor.
Well, in the end, Dr. Hunterman, it's been about creating a life worth living. Every single day, it persists. But like today, for example, the symptoms that I have today, if I had them 20 years ago, would have completely debilitated me. And now, 20 years later, there's such a familiarity with the symptoms, and I've been through it so many times that I've learned to cope.
Okay.
And 20 years ago, I wouldn't be able to function. But now, 20 years later, I've been at it for a long time. I have a lot of insight. So the conquering is a daily thing, but again, everybody has those daily challenges that they must overcome. So it's just on par with anything else. I think it's on par with any kind of affliction. You look across humanity, and each person is dealt a unique kind of set of what I call in the book existential fixations. It's just kind of handed to you without any options, whether it be diabetes or cancer or MS or muscular dystrophy or any Parkinson's. All these things happen to people, and nobody chooses them.
Right.
And so everybody has their fixations that they deal with that are handed to them, and we do the best we can with those. Mine happens to be schizophrenia. I don't pity myself for that. I see it on par with the rest of humanity, just like something else, to try to work out each day and do my best. But I did survive the early part, and I wanted just to mention, in the early part, first onset of psychosis, there's a tremendous amount of peril during that time because people don't know what's going on with them, and they're prone to criminality or acts of behavior that they would not necessarily do. I escaped that fate, fortunately. I acted erratically enough to warrant some kind of antisocial kind of behavior, maybe verbal aggression or something that was unnecessary because I was paranoid. But not everybody escapes that period, and that's why we see so many mentally ill in jail.
Sure.
Because during that first onset of psychosis, there's no insight, there's no support, and somebody has no capacity to control their behavior, and then they get a very bad adverse outcome. I was fortunate to escape that, so I survived that period.
Yeah.
Now, it's just not in my fabric. I have no safety issues. I would never be a safety threat anymore. But early on, certainly, due to the delusions and the paranoia, thinking that people are trying to, put my safety at risk or trying to harm me or what things like that, I could have been prone. So that's the survival part. The conquering is a daily thing. That part never goes away. But that's okay. That's okay. That's my lot, and that's fine.
So I guess, another question that I have, and I'm sorry if these are kind of all over the map, but you're sparking a lot of reflections here that I'm having. But when you think about identity and who you are as a person, what role does this experience of being diagnosed and being treated in the mental health system, being hospitalized, and then on a daily basis having to conquer and maybe reconquer and cope with the challenges, what role has those experiences played in making you who you are, your identity?
Well, it certainly has tested my will, my spirit has created a tremendous amount of internal spirit, primarily, some grit. I don't worry about things if they don't go according to plan anymore, and I really don't worry about what I would say the details of life. If something doesn't go well, I just brush it off a lot quicker than I used to, because I got bigger fish to fry in a general thing. But if something goes awry, Dr. Hardiman has given me a good perspective on life of what's important.
Sure.
And it's instigated a certain amount of spirituality, and I don't necessarily mean in a theological point of view, but just the capacity to persist each day. And, I don't doubt my capacity anymore to persist. No matter what happens with the illness, it's okay now. Like, if I get hospitalized again, it's okay. I don't care. Like, I know that you give me some time, I'll work it out in my mind, and I will get back at it.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, that's okay. If things don't go according to plan, that's okay. If I have to take a U-turn at the Washington and Western, I'll take the U-turn. That's okay.
Right.
And so if things don't go just according to plan, and that's not really a big concern about it anymore. It's more of the priorities in life have kind of come to the forefront.
So you talked a little bit about the early onset idea. College is a time when mental health challenges often hit college students. Mm-hmm. It's a time when stress and anxiety are certainly high, and people are learning their own identities and often overloaded with responsibilities and new responsibilities and new life skills to acquire. And we read about the stresses that college students are under, and we read about increasing mental health challenges among college students. So some of our listenership might be college students at the University of Albany. I wonder if you have thoughts about how students in that position might think about mental health challenges that they're going through.
Well, they should be very optimistic, because when I was diagnosed in '95, it was archaic. It still was archaic at that point. It was better than the required reading that you provided, Dr. Hardiman, on the history of mental health, which I recall, and thank my lucky graces that I wasn't born in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or whatever, because, I have no preference for an ice bath.
Right.
So there's a lot of optimism now. There's a lot of resources around the time when it first occurs. So people with the disorder now, should feel very optimistic about living a full life without any obstacles, without any barriers. I think just a little bit of stigma might be there, a residual kind of stigma a little bit about the disorder. But again, it's like a private medical problem. People don't have to share that with other people. You know, you can keep it private if you choose. If you want to tell people, that's your choice as well. But there's a tremendous amount of optimism now where recovery is expected.
Right.
Now, there was just one item of in regards to schizophrenia that I had to put out there, and it's called how do you say that, doctor? Anosognosia. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
It's a rather new term that kind of is correlated with schizophrenia, and that is level of insight.
Okay.
If somebody has schizophrenia with anosognosia, the outcomes are going to be quite less optimal, let's say, and that is a syndrome that is associated with schizophrenia that is for capacity for insight.
Okay.
Those in the mental health system, chronically, state hospitals, people that don't recover, generally have that condition, and they cannot process, the metacognitive is lacking. They don't have the ability to process the delusions, to process it is their reality, and they have no reflection on it.
Right.
So when a therapist works with somebody with schizophrenia, the primary distinction needs to be the anosognosia. Now, does this person have capacity to process their symptoms and learn from their symptoms? And reality test with a therapist, or does this person have a permanent blind spot? And some people, unfortunately, have that condition. They have a permanent blind spot for the disorder. So in conceptualizing it, in my mind, that is the first thing to consider, is this a level of ability to have some insight. And it's a primary distinction, is very important. And as I move along in my career, I'm kind of thinking it is a zero-sum game, Alyssa, in some capacity. Either the person has the capacity or they do not. I used to think it was a spectrum, that they could develop insight little by little. And I thought when I was a therapist that I would see it. Oh, this person is processing their symptoms with me. They understand. I reality tested with them. Oh no, of course the government's not after me. Oh yeah, you're right, Robert. The government's not after me. Well, that's good. I'm glad that we have that insight. But then the next time I go back to see him, the government's after him again.
Right.
So we're back to the same thing, and so it's a primary distinction. It's a very important distinction. And it's a fairly new topic of research.
Yeah.
And I think it'll bear significant fruit, and it needs to be investigated in some capacity, in depth, about its availability. And is it developmental?
Sure.
Many researchers now think it is developmental. I'm kind of on the fence right now. I'm not exactly sure. But in regards to the research on schizophrenia, they're doing amazing things. They're looking at the brain from every single angle. A lot of genetic investigation, a lot of neurological investigation, a lot of psychosocial interventions and programs and things like that. So people have to be very, very optimistic. I've been in touch with a lot of prominent doctors and psychiatrists because of my book. And they've been very, very kind to me, and they're doing amazing research into the brain, the basal ganglia area, the hippocampus, the forebrain. They're looking at all these different aspects to find the detriment to schizophrenia. And I laud their accomplishments and their work. But I always think of the term the ghost in the machine. In other words, there might be a brain component, but don't forget the ghost of the machine, that being the mechanism that drives it all. And is it a spiritual malaise or is it a biological or genetic malaise? I think it's probably a combination of sorts. And so scientists go, doing great work, but when I read their work, I go, oh, that's great. They're looking at the hippocampus. Wow, that's wonderful. They're finding, hippocampus. But I always think, the ghost in the machine, you can't measure the spirit.
Right.
And who knows if that's the trigger, the spirit or the biological. But they're doing amazing work with research, and there's a lot to be optimistic about.
And you're doing some amazing work, though, too, with this. And I think this book is a resource for individuals. It helps share a story. And it also, as you were talking about stigma before, it helps to break a stigma or help people feel more comfortable. Whether you use a pen name or not, your story is still here. Mm-hmm. And individuals can look at this and have a better understanding of what schizophrenia is and sort of hear your journey and how you said the survival part to the daily conquering. And these are the things that I think, these personal stories, what people need to know. They might have an idea of what they think schizophrenia is from something they read or something that they saw, and they have an inaccurate view of what it is. So this right here, aside, yes, the research, but these personal stories, being able to help break the stigma in different ways by sharing experiences, getting messages out there. I think that is equally as important when we're looking at how schizophrenia is viewed and how people who have a condition feel comfortable with themselves. So I think that's a huge part of what you're doing, and I think this is a great addition to books to read and to our profession.
Yeah, to that point, it's just we see ourselves from the subjective, but others see only the objective. Yeah. So it's hard to understand the psychology behind it.
But I mean, we're wrapping up, but I want to thank you so much. And Eric, do you want to?
I guess I just wanted to ask quickly, sort of where you hope to go with this, because I think I asked about identity. I would assume that one of your new identities now is that of author. that you've accomplished this first book, and I say first because I'm curious. I don't want to, again, put words in your mouth, but is there more writing that's going to happen? And where do you go from here?
I'm not exactly sure. It's been a very interesting journey with the book. Most unanticipated joy. I didn't expect to ever finish a book, to write a book. It's been intrinsic the whole time. And I'm just enjoying the ride. I'm having fun with it. I've been in contact with a lot of prominent people who research schizophrenia. And Dr. Hardiman and Alyssa, they've been amazing. I've reached out to Ellen Sachs, and we've gone back and forth. She told me last time, because I always called her Dr. Sachs. She, the last time we emailed, she said, please, Robert, call me Ellen. But people in the field have been tremendously supportive, and they want to hear personal testimonies. Yeah. Those who research are the most interested in the personal testimonies, coincidentally, which is heartening to me. And so Dr. Hardiman, I really don't know where it's all going to lead. I'm just living it day by day. Yeah. And it's been fascinating. And I continue to learn about the disorder and what's being done about it.
Well, it makes you an expert. I mean, one of the things is we talk about expertise and what does it mean to be an expert. And some people are experts through research, and some people are an expert through book knowledge, and some people are experts through experience. And I think that's really what you've done, is you've taken your own personal life, your own experiences in that life and in the mental health system and being treated and sort of being who you are, and you've taken that experience and turned it into expertise that can help others.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being on. Again, the title of the book is On Conquering Schizophrenia, From the Desk of a Therapist and Survivor by Robert Francis. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And where can listeners find the book? I think that's really important. I would love for people to find this and actually read it.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
And you know where that means. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, but primarily Amazon, where everybody buys their book. It's available in ebook and ebook, Kindle, and paperback.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. This has been The Social Workers, and we've been here again with Robert Francis, author of On Conquering Schizophrenia. We will be back with another episode soon. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.